Sarah Mitchell had always been drawn to solitary places, which was why the job posting for a lighthouse keeper on the remote Oregon coast seemed perfect. The Sentinel Point Lighthouse had stood for over 100 years on a jagged outcrop of rock, surrounded by churning Pacific waters and thick coastal fog. The previous keeper had left suddenly, they had mentioned, and they needed someone immediately. Sarah didn't ask why. She needed to escape her life in Portland, needed the silence, needed to be alone with her thoughts after her divorce. The isolation seemed like medicine. She arrived on a gray October afternoon, the kind where the clouds hung so low they seemed to merge with the sea. A local fisherman named Tom ferried her across the choppy water from the mainland, her belongings packed into 3 weathered duffel bags. Tom was a man of few words, his face creased like old leather, but as he helped her onto the dock, he paused. His hand gripped her arm a moment too long, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. He said only one thing before leaving her there, "Don't listen to the knocking." Then he was gone, his boat swallowed quickly by the fog. The lighthouse was exactly what Sarah had imagined, a tall white tower with peeling paint, attached to a small Capers cottage with windows that rattled in their frames. Inside, the cottage was sparse but functional. A narrow bed, a wood stove, shelves stocked with canned goods, and a logbook on the table. The logbook was where each keeper recorded their daily observations, weather conditions, ships passing, maintenance performed. Sarah flipped through the recent entries. The previous keeper, a man named David Chen, had kept meticulous records for 3 months. Then the entries became erratic. "Fog won't they lift," one said. "Heard it again," said another. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks ago, was a single scrawled line, "They want in." Sarah told herself it meant nothing. Isolated people imagine things. The mind played tricks in solitude. She spent her first evening exploring the lighthouse, climbing the spiral stairs to the lamp room where the massive Fresnel lens waited. She cleaned the glass, checked the mechanisms, and at dusk, she lit the beacon. Its powerful beam cut through the fog in steady rotations, a warning to ships that rocks and death waited below. As darkness fell completely, Sarah made herself dinner, wrote her first log entry, and tried to ignore how loudly the wind howled around the cottage. The knocking started on the 3rd night. Sarah had just fallen asleep when she heard it, 3 measured knocks on the cottage door. Knock. 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 She sat up in bed, heart pounding. The nearest human was miles away across dangerous water. She waited, listening. The knocking came again, the same rhythm, the same force. Knock. 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 Sarah rose, grabbed the flashlight by her bed, and approached the door. Through the small window, she could see nothing but fog and darkness. She called out, "Was there?" Only the wind answered. When the knocking came a 3rd time, she threw open the door, flashlight beam cutting into the night. Nothing. No one. Just the empty dock and the restless sea. She told herself it was the wind, some natural phenomenon of this exposed place. But the knocking returned the next night, and the night after that. Always 3 measured strikes. Always around midnight. Sarah stopped going to the door. She lay in bed, covers pulled to her chin, listening to that patient, persistent rhythm. Knock. 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 During the days, she threw herself into work, maintaining the light, recording weather observations, trying to stay busy. But the isolation was becoming oppressive. The fog rarely lifted. No ships passed. The radio she used to report to the Coast Guard crackled with static more than voices. After a week, Sarah noticed something in the logbooks. She had gone back through years of entries, looking for any mention of the knocking. Most keepers never mentioned anything unusual. But some did. Every few years, a keeper would start writing strange things. Visitors at night. Knocking on all the windows. Voices calling my name from the water. And then those keepers would leave abruptly, or their entries would simply stop, replaced by a new keeper's handwriting. Sarah found 14 keepers over the Lighthouse's 100-year history who had mentioned the phenomena. 14 people who had experienced what she was experiencing now. The knocking changed on the 10th night. It no longer came from just the door. Sarah lay rigid in bed as the knocking moved around the cottage. Knock. Knock. Knock on the east window. Then the north. Then the door again. It was circling the building, whatever it was, maintaining that same measured rhythm. And then she heard something that turned her blood to ice, her name. Sarah, called a voice from outside, barely audible over the wind. Sarah, let me in. It sounded like her ex-husband, Mark. But Mark was in Portland, hundreds of miles away. Sarah, please, I'm freezing out here. The voice was so convincing, so familiar. Her hand reached for the doorknob before she stopped herself, remembering Tom's warning. She didn't sleep that night. As dawn approached, the knocking finally ceased, and Sarah climbed the lighthouse stairs to watch the sunrise. But there was no sunrise, only a grey lightening of the fog. From the lamp room's height, she looked down at the rocks below and saw something that made her stomach drop. There were shapes down there, dozens of them, standing motionless in the surf. Women's shops. They stood facing the lighthouse, unmoving despite the waves that crashed over them. Sarah grabbed the binoculars with shaking hands. Through the lenses, she could see them more clearly, pale figures in old-fashioned clothing from different eras. A woman in a Victorian dress. A man in a World War II naval uniform. A child in clothes from the 1950s. All of them waterlogged, their skin gray and bloated, their eyes empty black holes. They stood in the water, waiting. Sarah tried the radio, desperate to call for help, but got only static. She tried her cell phone, knowing there was no signal but hoping anyway. Nothing. She was alone with whatever these things were. That day, she didn't eat. She couldn't eat. She sat in the cottage with a knife in her hand, watching the windows, waiting for night. The logbook lay open before her, and she wrote, "They're in the water. Dozens of them. They drowned here. They want company." Her hand trembled as she wrote, and she understood now why the beacon had left, why all those keepers had fled. When darkness fell and the knocking resumed, it was louder, more insistent. The windows rattled with each strike. Knock. 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 And the voices came, so many voices now, calling her name, begging to be let in. They sounded like everyone she'd ever known. Her mother, her sister, childhood friends, Mark. Sarah, we're so cold. Sarah, please help us. Sarah, just open the door. She covered her ears, but the voices penetrated, worming into her mind. She screamed at them to stop, but they only grew louder, more desperate. Then she heard a new sound, footsteps on the lighthouse stairs. Heavy, wet footsteps climbing up from below. Sarah's breath caught. She had locked the cottage door, hadn't she? The footsteps continued their slow ascent, accompanied by the sound of dripping water. She grabbed her flashlight and the knife, pressing herself into the corner of the room. The footsteps reached the top of the cottage stairs. The bedroom door, which she'd locked from inside, slowly creaked open. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the faint glow of the lamp room above. It was soaking wet, water pooling beneath it, and it wore the uniform of a lighthouse keeper from decades past. Its face was pallid and decayed, one eye gone, the other fixed on Sarah. "You have to tend the light," it said in a voice like gravel scraping on stone. "The light must not go out. If it goes out, we can come inside. We can stay." Sarah understood then, with horrible clarity. The lighthouse wasn't just a warning to ships. It was a barrier, a ward. As long as the light burned, these drowned souls were bound to the water and rocks. If it went dark, they would be free to enter, to inhabit the living spaces, perhaps to inhabit her. She ran. Sarah bolted past the figure, which reached for her with waterlogged hands but moved too slowly. She raced up the stairs to the lamp room, where the Fresnel lens turned steadily, its light burning bright. The dead keeper followed, his footsteps echoing up the spiral stairs. Sarah reached the lamp room and slammed the heavy door behind her, throwing the bolt. Through the glass windows of the lamp room, she could see them now in the band sweep. They had come closer, emerging from the water, climbing onto the rocks. Dozens of pale figures shambling toward the lighthouse, their mouths open in silent screams or pleas. She checked the lamp's fuel. Enough for 3 more days if she was careful. But then what? She couldn't leave, the sea was too rough to risk in the small emergency boat, and Tom wouldn't return for 2 more weeks. She was trapped in this glass room at the top of the lighthouse with the dead circling below. The keeper who had followed her up the stairs pounded on the door now, his fists leaving wet marks on the metal. "Let me in," he moaned. "I just want to rest. I'm so tired of the water." Sarah spent the night in the lamp room, watching the fuel gauge, watching the dead gather below. She understood the pattern now. Every keeper who had stayed eventually went mad from the siege, and they either fled or they made a mistake. They let the light go out, either by accident or because they couldn't bear it anymore. And then the drowned claimed them, dragged them into the water to join their endless vigil. The logbooks never recorded what happened to those keepers because dead men don't write. As the hours passed, Sarah made a decision. She would keep the light burning. She would outlast them. When Tom came with supplies in 2 weeks, she would leave and never come back. She rationed the fuel carefully, fighting exhaustion, fighting the voices that called to her constantly now. They knew her deepest fears, her regrets, her secrets. They used her mother's voice to talk about Sarah's childhood. They used Mark's voice to remind her of her failures. They scratched at the glass, left handprints that evaporated in the leak's heat. Days blurred together. Sarah slept in brief intervals, always waking with a start to check the light. She drank rainwater collected in a bucket and ate stale crackers she found in the lamp room's emergency supplies. The dead never tired, never left. They waited with the patience of those who had already surrendered time. And slowly, Sarah felt herself slipping. The isolation, the sleeplessness, the constant psychological assault, it was eroding her sanity. She began talking to them, arguing with the voices. She laughed at inappropriate times. She caught herself reaching for the lamp's controls, tempted to shut it off just to end the siege, even knowing what would follow. On the 13th day, Tom's boat appeared through the fog. Sarah saw it from the lamp room and felt a surge of hope so intense it brought tears. She stumbled down the stairs, past the dead keeper who still waited outside the lamp room door, through the cottage, and out to the dock. Tom took one look at her, gaunt and wild-eyed, and knew. "You heard them," he said simply. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. As Tom loaded her meager belongings, she looked back at the lighthouse. The figures were retreating into the water now, sinking beneath the waves, their time ended for now. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah managed to ask. Tom started the boat's engine. "Would you have believed me? And they need keepers. The light has to stay lit." He looked at her seriously. "Will you report what happened?" Sarah thought about it. Who would believe her? And Tom was right, the light had to stay lit. Someone would have to tend it, even knowing what waited in the water. She shook her head. Tom nodded approvingly as the lighthouse disappeared into the fog behind them. Sarah never spoke of what happened at Sentinel Point. She moved to Arizona, as far from the ocean as she could get. But sometimes, on quiet nights, she still hears it, knock, knock, knock. And she wonders about the next keeper, alone in that lighthouse, learning too late that some jobs require more than courage. They require the willingness to resist an eternity of voices in the dark, calling your name, begging you to let them in from the cold water where they drown, where they wait, where they will always wait. The lighthouse still stands, its beam still turns, and somewhere, someone tends the light, not knowing yet that they're not just warning ships away from rocks. They're holding back the drowned, the patient dead who knock and call and promise rest if you'll just open the door and let the darkness in.